It's April 25th, 2010. This is an interview with Grete Sauer Edwards. Okay, Maisie, get over here. Come over here. Okay, so we want to make this recording just to have a permanent record of you and your life and all the interesting little things that have happened. So I didn't really have any kind of set thing, so I just want you to kind of talk. But why don't we first, if you don't mind, just tell a little bit about yourself in your early life and where you were born.
Well, I was born in 1923 in a small town in Bavaria called Talmessing, and I was raised by my mother and my grandparents. I really do not remember my dad. I know that my mother was divorced when I was 3 years old. My dad was not Jewish. My mother and family are Jewish, and I was raised Jewish. I really had a good childhood.
What are some of your earliest memories of your childhood?
My earliest memories are being friends with some of the, especially the Dorners who lived across the street. You know, I have some pictures of those girls. In fact, we went to see them when all of us went to Talmessing, and everything was great until Hitler came into power. And you know that, yes, it was about 20 miles.
20 miles. So there were, in Talmessing, this little town that you grew up in, there were hundreds of people living there, or
there
thousands?
There were about 1,200 people.
About 1,200 people. And how many Jews lived in Talmessing?
There were, I would say, 6 Jewish families.
Oh, that's all?
In Talmessing.
And what happened to them?
They went, well, the people moved away, and they could not.
Right. So there was no longer school, but was there a synagogue in Talmessing?
There was a synagogue, and I remember going there every Saturday with a family, and we had a rabbi in town, and there were services. And,
right.
You know.
So back to Talmessing, were there, so that you were born in 1923. 23. So your early memories, were there a lot of automobiles in Talmessing?
No, there were not.
Were there any automobiles?
Of the families got his first car, and I was old enough to remember, maybe 5, 6 years old. And we went for a ride, and I got so, I remember that. Because
so was that the first auto in Talmessing?
No, I don't think it was the first auto, but it was.
Right.
But I know that there were some people who had them, and then you could.
What about electricity?
Oh, we had electricity.
And you had electric refrigerators?
But even the bathrooms were very primitive. Very primitive.
But you had indoor bathroom.
We had an indoor bathroom, but nothing like the bathrooms.
But you have a toilet, a workable toilet.
That's
that you
right.
could use.
Next to the kitchen was a small room where they kept food. And, for example, eggs. Of course, we had chickens. But in order to preserve eggs, they used something, I don't know, that they kept the eggs in, and they would keep a long time. But there was no refrigeration.
So you didn't have any kind of refrigerated food.
There was
what
no
would you do with milk? Did you drink milk?
We went every day and bought a pitcher and getting milk.
So you had chickens at your house? Did you live on a farm?
No.
In the town?
We had a business, but my grandfather was not a businessman. It was my grandmother who was there and all that.
So, and then what kind of business did the family have?
It was a, what do you call it? There were some groceries, but also materials.
And then what kind of materials?
Well, for clothes and bed linens.
And would they sell that to the public? Did they have a store?
It was a store, and the store was Downstairs of the house, the front part of the house was the store.
And then you lived in the top.
Living room, the kitchen, and a bedroom downstairs, and then there were 4 bedrooms upstairs.
And who lived in this house with you?
The first I remember, it was my mother and I, my grandparents, and then my great-grandmother lived upstairs. She was a wonderful old lady.
How old was she?
She had to be in her 70s or 80s, but I remember her hands were all blue. You know, the veins were showing, and I asked her about that. I remember it, and she said, well, you know, Grete, das kommt mit den Alten. So, anyhow.
How old were you when she died? How about
I must have been 5 or 6, because I'm sure she died in the house.
Uh-huh.
There was a hospital in town, but, you know, people really didn't go.
So you lived with your mom, your grandparents,
That's right.
and then your great-grandma was there for a while.
Yes, but she, you know, didn't.
Now, what about your mother had?
Brothers who were in business, not in the same town.
Not in Talmessing.
Not
Close
in
by,
Talmessing.
or?
In Neumarkt. Siegfried was in Neumarkt, and Erwin was in Nuremberg. Erwin, you know, was the father of...
Problems.
Oh, well, he liked to go to the big town and dance, and those were big problems at the time. But then Aunt Martha was in Munich.
Who was Aunt Martha?
And Martha was just wonderful to the whole family and to me. I remember receiving a package from her every week with oranges and things that you could not buy in Talmessing. You had to buy in a bigger town. Every week.
And where did she live?
She lived in Munich.
And that was a little ways away, right?
That was more like 50 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just wonderful to me. I went there frequently because I know, you know, I had dental work done in Munich, and I would have to take a train from her, and I would take a train from Talmessing to Rode. Do you remember Rode?
Yes, yeah. I've taken that train.
And I transferred to go to Munich. Then if I went to Nuremberg, transferred and went, you know, the other way.
Mm-hmm.
But I went there frequently, and she was just wonderful to me.
So when you were growing up in Talmessing, saying you were young before you were subjected to anti-Semitism,
Yes.
in those early days, what did you do?
They were wonderful. We played just like kids play.
What would kids do back then?
Well, we played hide and seek, and we played with dolls, and the same thing that kids do nowadays. Margaret, if you remember the red-headed woman we went to see, and she carried on when we visited. Oh, I never meant to do anything wrong. Well, she did. She dropped me like the rest of them. And Marta Dorna and the clothes.
So you would play with them in the town,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you went to the same school as them? Were you
We
going
did.
to school then?
We all went to the school.
And that was a little, like, grade school in Talmessing?
It was a school in Talmessing where they had first grade, and then the other grades were second and third, fourth and fifth, sixth and seventh, and they had nothing after that. Of course, I went to Nuremberg after that.
Okay. And what other memories of your town, or did you venture out quite often?
Talmessing?
As a kid, yeah. I mean, you pretty much
No.
stayed in the
Oh,
town, or did you
remember-
go out and travel or do any of these kinds of things?
When I was in Munich, Aunt Martha took me, you know, to a lot of places. But when I was in school in Talmessing, we would take field trips. Like they'd hire a big old, and we'd go to Weissenberg where they had a big cathedral and things like that. And we went picnicking. Now I remember every Saturday night, my grandparents would pack lunch or dinner, and we'd walk to nearby towns to different taverns, and we'd have it there. And my grandfather would have beer, and I would have something similar to a Coke. And that was a lot of fun at the time.
Do you remember what kind of food you ate when you were a kid?
Yeah, I remember.
What kind of food did you eat?
Very simple. We had, you know.
What would breakfast be like? Would you have breakfast?
Yes, I always had cacao, which was like hot chocolate milk.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not have toast. We had just had bread.
Right.
But
And
we
then
usually did not have.
Would you eat sandwiches for lunch
Yes.
or
We
sausage?
we
like
went
the
home
typical?
for lunch. We went home for lunch, and our lunch was like a big dinner because we ate dinner at lunch.
So that was the big meal of the
That
day.
was the big meal of the day, and then we had sandwiches usually in the evening.
Did you have any
There was
cakes and cookies
yes.
and all chocolate and all that
Yeah,
stuff?
we did have that. It's not as plentiful as we have it now, but
Right.
we
So there
had
was
it.
no shortage of that.
No, there was no shortage.
And then you talked about these animals, farm animals at your house. You had chickens in the backyard.
Mhm.
Would they lay eggs and you'd
Oh,
get their eggs?
sure.
Did you have any other animals that produced
We
anything?
didn't, but my next door neighbor had pigs and cows, and the one to one side, and the other side was not a brewery, a beer garden.
Mm-hmm.
And across the street was the Dorners, which was a hardware store. And then next to them was a chimney sweep. I remember him coming home just black every day. And I mean, it was a small town.
Mm-hmm.
You knew
So-
everybody.
And everybody knew what everybody was doing.
That's right, and there were 3 bakeries, which I liked, especially the pretzels.
Did they have, you said they had like a beer garden, was that?
They had a number of them.
And so was that a social gathering place?
It was. It certainly was. Grandfather went to the beer garden every evening. Hitler time came around.
Mm-hmm.
But there were at least 4 beer gardens. Now there were 3 churches besides the synagogue. There was a church, Oberdorf, which means the upper town. There was 1 Catholic church. There were very few Catholics living in Messing, but there was a Catholic church there.
Does anybody have any questions about Grandma's early life? Anything you'd like to know? Huh?
Wow.
Any questions? Well, we haven't gotten into that.
We haven't gotten to
We
Hitler
haven't, we
yet.
haven't gotten to that part. I'm just talking about Grandma's early days, before the rise of Nazism and all that, when she was just young. Is there anything you want to know what life was like back then? Or
I want to live like that.
you want to live like that?
You're
It sounds good. So was it really that good? Was living back then really that good?
Well,
Where
it was so
simple?
It was simple. It was much more primitive, certainly, than what we have now. I remember playing games, in the evening with the family. I remember the first radio that the Rosenfelds got the first radio, and we all ran to their house to listen to the radio. And
Right.
they had a business too, and there were 2 sons and the parents. But I remember going there and listening to the radio.
And
I don't remember my grandparents ever having one. I really don't.
And was there any, do you remember any live entertainment, like musicians or
Oh
plays?
yes,
or
they
anything
they
like that?
had dances, and they had a Kirchweih, which means when the month that the church was established in that was the upper town, the middle town,